On a cold morning in June 1992, a Soviet-era Ilyushin cargo plane touches down on a dirt strip near Hustai in Tuv province, Mongolia, and inside its wooden crates are 16 Przewalski's horses that have never in their lives stood on the steppe their ancestors were taken from. The crate doors open. They step down slowly onto grass. Stocky animals, dun-colored, built low and heavy through the shoulder. Erect black manes standing straight up like a brush, and no forelock at all, so the face is bare between the ears. Down the length of each spine runs a dark dorsal stripe. These are the exact wild markings their kind carried when the last of them was seen out here, more than 2 decades earlier. The horses lift their heads into the wind. They are standing on ground their species had vanished from. Here is what came of that landing. Over roughly 15 years of releases that began right here, the takhi went from 0 wild individuals anywhere on Earth to a self-sustaining, free-breeding wild population back on the exact grasslands it had disappeared from. This is an animal the International Union for Conservation of Nature had formally listed as extinct in the wild. Gone. And it came back. If this is the kind of story you want more of, subscribe. We publish one every week. To understand what those 16 horses represented, you have to go back to how close to nothing the takhi had come. The takhi is Mongolia's national horse, the last truly wild horse on the planet, never domesticated. And through the 20th century, it was hunted and squeezed and pushed off the steppe piece by piece, its water and grazing taken by herds of livestock, its foals taken for zoos. The last confirmed wild sighting came in 1969, near a spring in the Gobi called Takhin Shar Nuru. A small band, seen once, and then never again. After that, there were none. Not one wild takhi anywhere on Earth. The only Przewalski's horses left alive were in zoos and menageries in Europe. And that population was terrifyingly small. Every single Przewalski's horse alive today descends from roughly a dozen captive founders that actually reproduced, and about 12 animals. That is the whole gene pool, like they came from a handful of turn-of-the-century captures out of the Gobi, and their descendants were tracked through 2 great breeding records, the Prague and the Munich studbook lines. A dozen ancestors standing behind an entire species. Then came the people who thought that dozen might be enough. In the Netherlands, the foundation reserves for the Przewalski horse, working with Mongolian scientists and the Mongolian government, put forward a plan that sounded to a lot of serious people close to reckless. Take horses bred for generations inside zoo enclosures, load them onto aircraft, fly them thousands of kilometers to the open steppe, and then let them go. Release a species that no living animal had ever known how to be wild into a landscape that had killed off its ancestors. The Dutch Foundation and the Mongolians had made their proposal. Ship a species down to a dozen founders across half the world and set it free. And the objection that met them was not sentimental. It was genetic, and it was precise, and it named exactly how this would fail. The objection was genetic, and it was serious. With so few founders, roughly a dozen animals standing behind every Przewalski's horse alive, inbreeding was not a risk to worry about later. It was measurable, and it was already present. Critics named the mechanism of failure precisely: inbreeding depression. When a population passes through a bottleneck that narrow, harmful recessive traits stop staying hidden and start showing up in the animals themselves. The predictions followed from that: reduced fertility, mares that would not conceive, and foals too weak to see their first year through. And there was a second objection, one that had nothing to do with genes at all. These were zoo-bred horses. Generations of them, born in enclosures in Prague and Munich and the Netherlands, fed by hand, watered from a trough. A steppe horse has to know how to find water in dry country, how to hold a harem together, how to read the sky before a winter arrives. Nobody had taught these animals any of it, because nothing in a menagerie could. The fear was that you would ship a species halfway around the world only to watch it fail to behave like itself. The answer to both objections was slow, careful, and unglamorous. It began on paper. Stud bookkeepers had tracked the pedigree of every single Przewalski's horse for decades. Every birth, every parent, every line traced back to those original founders. From that ledger, they could calculate kinship between any 2 animals. So they chose pairings not for convenience, but to spread the founder genes as evenly as possible, minimizing kinship in each mating. Breed the least related animals to each other again and again, and you slow the loss. You keep more of the 12 founders alive in each generation than chance ever would. Then came the behavior. Rather than releasing horses straight onto open ground, the project built large acclimatization enclosures at Hustai, fenced stretches of real steppe big enough that harems could form on their own terms, a stallion gathering his mares, the social order sorting itself out. Foals were born there on the grass under the open sky, not in a stall. By the time a group was released, they had already begun learning to be wild horses in the place they would be wild. If you are finding this worth your time, a subscribe and a like genuinely help these get made. And then the waiting began. Through the mid and late 1990s, the releases came in batches, a handful of horses at a time, crated across thousands of kilometers and turned out onto the steppe. The numbers moved, but painfully. A few dozen animals spread across enormous country, each one carrying more of the founder gene pool than it could afford to lose. Then the dzud arrived. The dzud is the brutal Mongolian winter, the one where the snow lies deep and hard and the grass freezes out of reach beneath it. Horses paw through the crust to find anything to eat, and when they cannot, they weaken, and the weak ones do not last until spring. It took foals. It took stallions. Every hard winter, the herds gave back some of what the summer had gained. For years, the count stayed fragile, and every winter threatened to erase the gains. Each survey was a held breath, and then the herds began doing something no ledger and no enclosure could have arranged. The foals born wild on the steppe were surviving their first winters on their own. And that was the thing no one could stage manage. A foal born on open steppe, standing through a Mongolian winter with no keeper watching, no supplemental hay, no enclosure wall between it and the cold, it survived. And then, a year or two on, it did the harder thing. It formed a harem of its own. It gathered mares, held them, kept them through the seasons, exactly the way its ancestors had before any of them ever saw the inside of a crate. When enough of that started happening at once, the count stopped shrinking. The herds were breeding faster than the winters could take them. That is a plain sentence, but it carries the whole argument. Because the argument had been that a species built from roughly a dozen captive founders would fail here. That the fertility would falter, the foals would die, the behavior would never come back, and instead, quietly, on the grass at Hustai, the behavior came back on its own. Then came the last hard test. The winter of 2009 to 2010 was a dzud, the deep-killing winter of the steppe, and it cut the Hustai herd sharply. Horses that had been born wild, that had already survived years out there, went down in the snow. For a while, it looked like the old fear had simply been delayed rather than beaten. But the herds recovered. That is the difference between a fragile population and a self-sustaining one. A fragile population does not come back from a winter like that. This one did. The foals kept being born, the harems kept forming, and within a few seasons, the numbers were climbing again. In 2011, the International Union for Conservation of Nature reclassified Przewalski's horse. It moved off the category of extinct in the wild, where it had sat for decades, and onto endangered. That is a bureaucratic sentence for an extraordinary fact. An animal that had 0 wild individuals on Earth was now, officially, a wild species again. The global wild and reintroduced population climbed past 2,000 animals. Several hundred of them live free today across 3 Mongolian sites. Hustai National Park, where the crates first came down, and Gobibi out west, and Komin Tal, and the founder lines reached further than that. Reintroductions in China and Kazakhstan draw on the same small pool of ancestors, the same 12 or so animals that once carried the entire future of the species in their blood. Here is the part that tends to get left out. Some of the scientists who had doubted this, who had said a founder group that small could never hold itself together in the wild, ended up citing these very counts in their own work. The numbers answered them. They did not have to be argued with. They just had to be tallied winter after winter until the tally spoke for itself. So picture it now. Late summer at Hustai. The grass is tall and moving in the wind, and standing in it beside its mother is a takhi foal. Stubby upright mane, no forelock, and running the whole length of its spine, a dark dorsal stripe, the exact wild marking its ancestors carried. It is standing on the same ground where in 1969, someone recorded the last wild takhi anyone would see for a very long time. And then for 23 years, none at all. Not there. Not anywhere on Earth outside a fence. That foal does not know any of this. It knows the grass, and the wind, and the shape of its mother against the light, which is, in the end, the only proof that ever mattered. If you want more stories like this one, subscribe. We publish one every week.